I never planned to become invisible. It happened so gradually I barely noticed. Like a photograph fading in sunlight, the colors of my existence slowly bleaching away until I was just a faint outline of the woman I used to be. At 63, with Harold gone for 5 years now, I had unknowingly settled into the role everyone expected. Margaret Wilson, the reliable widow, the ever-available grandmother, the keeper of family traditions, particularly at Pine Haven, our cherished lake house in northern Wisconsin. That April morning started like any other. I was making breakfast before my weekly cleaning session at Daniel's house. My youngest son had never quite mastered the art of housekeeping. The kitchen radio hummed softly with the morning news as I whisked eggs for a quick omelet. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Mom, can you watch the kids Thursday? Kyle's got a work thing and I have that dinner with clients. Thanks." No, please, no if you're free. Just the assumption that I would rearrange whatever plans I might have had, not that I had any, that was the problem. I hadn't even responded when another message appeared, this one from Thomas. "Hey Mom, Jennifer and I are thinking about using Pine Haven the last 2 weeks of July. That works for you, right?" Pine Haven, the 6-bedroom log cabin that Harold and I had purchased 30 years ago when the children were small. The place where we'd spent every summer creating memories, fishing off the dock, roasting marshmallows under star-filled skis, teaching the children to swim in the crystal-clear waters of Lake Wayward. Now it was just a reservation to be made, and I was merely the caretaker. I typed back quick affirmatives to both messages, then set my phone down and stared at my half-whisked eggs congealing in the bowl. When had I become so amenable, so pliable, so damn invisible? The real awakening came 3 weeks later at Rebecca's house. I'd arrived early to help set up for my granddaughter Emma's birthday party. It was a beautiful May day, the kind that promised summer wasn't far behind. I let myself in through the side door with the spare key Rebecca had given me years ago. The house was quiet, which was unusual. Rebecca's home typically buzzed with the chaos of their 3 children. I set the homemade cake I'd baked on the kitchen counter and followed the murmur of voices to the back patio. The sliding glass door was partially open. Through it, I could see Rebecca, Thomas, and Daniel gathered around the patio table, drinking coffee. Jennifer, Thomas's wife, was there too, along with Kyle, Rebecca's husband. They hadn't noticed me yet. "I'm just saying," Thomas was saying. "Mom can't keep managing Pine Haven by herself much longer. You know how she gets confused with the winterizing procedures." I froze, hand on the door handle. Confused? I'd been winterizing that cabin since before Thomas knew how to tie his shoes. "She forgot to have the chimney cleaned last fall," Rebecca added. "That could have been dangerous." I hadn't forgotten. I'd scheduled it for November, but then Daniel had needed me to watch his son when his ex-wife had an emergency, and I'd had to reschedule. The cleaning had been done in December instead. "Well, it's not like any of us have time to take it over," Daniel said, leaning back in his chair. "Between work and the kids, I can barely manage my own house." "Which is why Mom needs to think about the future," Thomas replied. His voice took on that authoritative tone he'd inherited from Harold, the one that always made me bristle. "She's not getting any younger. Eventually, she'll need to move into something more manageable, maybe assisted living in a few years." "Assisted living?" I mouthed silently, incredulous. I still swam 3 times a week at the YMCA and volunteered at the community garden. Just last month, I'd repainted my entire kitchen by myself. "Well, when she does," Rebecca said, lowering her voice, "we need to make sure Pine Haven stays in the family. Dad always wanted that." "Absolutely," Thomas agreed. "We grew up there, our kids are growing up there, it's our legacy." Our legacy, not my home, not the place Harold and I had lovingly built together. A legacy, an inheritance, a foregone conclusion. "Mom's great with the grandkids," Kyle added, "but let's be real, she doesn't have a lot going on otherwise. Pine Haven gives her purpose. When the time comes, we'll need to be gentle about it." Jennifer shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Shouldn't Margaret be part of this conversation? It's her house, after all." "Mom doesn't like to think about these things," Rebecca dismissed with a wave of her hand. "Besides, she's always said she wants us to have Pine Haven eventually." Had I, perhaps in some vague, distant way? The way you say someday, when someday feels like it will never actually arrive. "I just think," Jennifer began. "Speaking of Mom," Thomas interrupted, checking his watch. Shouldn't she be here by now? She's bringing the cake, right? I backed away from the door silently, my heart pounding. I retreated to the kitchen and stood there for a moment, the conversation replaying in my head. Then I picked up my purse, slipped out the side door, and drove away. 20 minutes later, I sat in my car in the parking lot of the Sunset View Cafe, hands still trembling on the steering wheel. I called Rebecca. "Mom, where are you? The party starts in an hour." "I'm so sorry, dear," I said, my voice perfectly controlled. "I'm not feeling well, must be something I ate. I've left the cake on your kitchen counter." "You were already here?" Rebecca sounded confused. "Just dropped it off and left. Didn't want to disturb your coffee. I'll make it up to Emma later this week." After ending the call, I sat there, staring at nothing. For the first time in 5 years, I felt something other than the dull acceptance that had become my constant companion since Harold's death. I felt angry. That evening, I poured myself a glass of red wine, Harold's favorite Merlot that I'd been saving for a special occasion, and opened my laptop. I hadn't planned to watch videos. I'd intended to look up winter home maintenance just to prove to myself and my absent children that I wasn't confused about anything. But somehow I found myself watching travel videos. Women my age or older, seeing the world on their own terms. There was one in particular, a 68-year-old former teacher from Oregon who had sold her home after her husband's death and was now traveling through Europe, staying in small villages and learning local cooking techniques. "I realized I had been living for everyone else," she said to the camera, the Mediterranean sparkling behind her. "My husband, my children, my students. When I found myself alone, I thought, who am I living for now?" And the answer was me. Finally me. I took another sip of wine and looked around my living room. Everything was familiar, comfortable. The sofa Harold and I had chosen together 20 years ago, the family photos arranged carefully on the mantel, the worn spot on the carpet where our dog Rusty used to lie in the sunbeam. And suddenly, it all felt like a museum to a life that no longer existed. I was the curator maintaining exhibits that everyone visited occasionally, but no one really saw anymore. I refilled my glass and opened a new browser tab. "How to sell your house," I typed. Then, after a moment's hesitation, I added, "flights to Rome." "Mrs. Wilson, these numbers look excellent," Diane Blackwell said, spreading the comparable sales figures across my dining room table. "Pine Haven is one of the most desirable properties on Lake Wayward. With the original hardwood floors, the stone fireplace, and that wraparound porch, not to mention the private dock and 2 acres of wooded land, we should be able to list well above what you were hopping for." I nodded, trying to appear calm and businesslike while my stomach churned with a mixture of exhilaration and terror. It had been 2 weeks since I'd overheard my children's conversation, 2 weeks of secret research and planning. "How quickly do you think it will sell?" I asked. Diane smiled. "In this market, for lakefront property, we'll have multiple offers within days. The trick will be sorting through to find the best one." She paused, studying me. "If you don't mind my asking, why are you selling? Pine Haven is a treasure. Most families hold onto properties like this for generations." I met her gaze steadily. "It's time for a change. My husband has been gone for 5 years, and I'm ready for a new chapter." "Well, I admire that," Diane said, gathering her papers. "Too many people stay stuck in their routines. Life's too short, especially at our age." She winked at me. "My husband and I took a sabbatical year when we turned 60, bought an RV and drove across the country. Best thing we ever did." After she left, I sat alone at my dining room table, surrounded by the papers she'd left for me to sign. Listing agreement, disclosure forms, a checklist of preparations for showing the property. Was I really going to do this? Sell Pine Haven without telling my children? Use the money to fund a completely different life than the one they expected me to live? My gaze fell on the family portrait hanging on the wall opposite, all of us at Pine Haven 5 summers ago. Harold was still alive then, his arm around my shoulders. The children and grandchildren were arranged around us, everyone smiling. The perfect family portrait. But I remembered that day clearly. Thomas had been annoyed because he'd wanted to go fishing but had to wait for the photographer. Rebecca had fussed endlessly about what everyone was wearing. Daniel had been late, as usual, causing tension. And I had spent the entire morning cooking and cleaning to prepare for the photo and the dinner that followed. I picked up the pen and signed the listing agreement. The next weekend, I told my children I was going up to Pine Haven to open it up for the season. It wasn't unusual. I did this every year in late May. "Do you need help, Mom?" Daniel asked during our weekly Sunday call. "I could come up on Saturday." "No need, sweetheart," I said, surprised at how easily the deception came. "Just the usual cleaning and airing out, nothing I can't handle." "Well, call if you change your mind," he said. "Oh, and can you check if we left Emma's pink swimsuit there last summer? She's been asking for it." Always an errand to run, always a task to complete. The drive to Pine Haven took just over 3 hours. As I turned onto the familiar gravel road that led to the cabin, my throat tightened. How many times had I made this drive? How many summers had started with this very journey, the car packed with groceries and swimsuits, the children squabbling in the backseat, Harold humming along to the radio. The cabin looked just as it always did, sturdy, welcoming, timeless. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow on the weathered logs. The lake sparkled through the pines. For a moment, I hesitated. This place held so many memories. Was I making a terrible mistake? Then I remembered Thomas's voice. "Mom can't keep managing Pine Haven by herself much longer." And Rebecca's dismissive tone. "Mom doesn't like to think about these things." I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The musty smell of a house closed up for months greeted me. I moved through the rooms, opening windows, letting in the fresh pine-scented air. But instead of beginning my usual cleaning routine, I went to the hall closet and pulled out several large plastic bins. For the next 3 days, I worked methodically. I wasn't cleaning Pine Haven for another summer of family visits. I was saying goodbye. I carefully collected the personal items that mattered most to me. The handmade quilts my grandmother had created, the collection of beach glass Harold and I had gathered over decades of morning walks along the shore, the leather-bound journal where I'd recorded the children's summer adventures year after year. I left the furniture, the kitchen equipment, the kayaks in the boathouse. Those things could go with the house. But the photographs came down from the walls, the special books were boxed up, and Harold's favorite fishing tackle was carefully packed away. On my last evening, I sat on the dock as the sun set over Lake Wayward. The water was calm, reflecting the fiery sky in perfect symmetry. A loon called somewhere in the distance, its haunting cry echoing across the water. "Am I doing the right thing, Harold?" I whispered. The breeze rustled the pines behind me. I closed my eyes and could almost feel his hand on my shoulder, hear his voice in my ear. "Maggie, you've always been the bravest one of us." I wasn't sure if that was true. But as I drove away from Pine Haven the next morning, the trunk of my car filled with memories and my heart pounding with equal measures of grief and anticipation, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Possibility. "Mom, can you pass the potatoes?" Thomas asked, reaching across the Sunday dinner table. It was mid-June, nearly 3 weeks since I'd listed Pine Haven. Diane had called yesterday with the news. We had an offer. Full asking price, minimal contingencies, from a family with 3 young children who had fallen in love with the place. They wanted to close in 30 days. I passed the bowl of mashed potatoes to Thomas, watching as he heaped a generous portion onto his plate. Around my dining room table sat my entire family, Thomas and Jennifer, Rebecca, Kyle, and their 3 children, Daniel and his son from his previous marriage. It was our monthly family dinner, a tradition I had maintained since Harold's death. Usually these dinners followed a predictable pattern. The children would talk about their jobs, their kids' activities, their vacation plans. I would listen, ask appropriate questions, and serve seconds. Today, however, the pattern would break. "Before dessert," I said, setting down my fork, "I have some news to share." 8 pairs of eyes turned toward me with varying degrees of interest. "I've sold Pine Haven." The silence that followed was absolute. Thomas's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Rebecca's water glass stopped midway to her lips. Daniel stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. "You've what?" Thomas finally managed. "Sold Pine Haven," I repeated calmly. "The closing is in 30 days. Rebecca set her glass down with a sharp crack against the table. "That's not funny, Mom." "It's not meant to be," I said. "It's a done deal. I've accepted an offer." But you can't just sell Pine Haven," Daniel spluttered. It's Pine Haven." "It's my house," I said simply. "The deed has been in my name since your father died." "But it's our family home," Rebecca's voice rose. "We've been going there our entire lives. The kids are growing up there." You've had many wonderful summers there, I agreed. And now another family will create their own memories. Thomas had recovered enough to shift into problem-solving mode, his default when faced with a situation he didn't like. Mom, whatever financial concerns you have, we can figure something out. You don't need to sell. It's not about money, I interrupted. Pine Haven is worth a great deal, but that's not why I'm selling. Then why? Daniel demanded. Why would you do something like this without even talking to us first? I looked at each of my children in turn, these adults who had once been the center of my world. Because it's time for me to live my own life, and that starts with using the proceeds from Pine Haven to travel. Travel, Rebecca repeated as if I'd said I was joining the circus. Where? I'm starting in Italy, Rome specifically. I leave next month after the closing. Kyle, who had been silently watching the drama unfold, suddenly laughed. You're kidding, right? This is some kind of joke. It's not a joke, Kyle, I said firmly. I've purchased my ticket. I've arranged for Mrs. Abernathy next door to collect my mail. I've even started learning Italian. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the translation app, and said carefully, La vita è grave troppo breve per I rimpianti. Life is too short for regrets, Jennifer translated quietly. Everyone looked at her in surprise. I studied Italian in college, she explained with a small shrug. How long will you be gone? Thomas demanded. I don't know, I answered honestly. I've booked the first month in Rome, but after that, we'll see. You can't be serious, Rebecca said, her voice hardening. Mom, you're 63, you've never traveled alone, and you don't speak the language. This is irresponsible. I felt a flare of anger. Irresponsible. I raised 3 children. I supported your father through his career. I maintained 2 homes. I've been available whenever any of you needed anything: childcare, emotional support, practical help. For 5 years since your father died, I've oriented my entire life around all of you. And now that I want something for myself, it's irresponsible. That's not what I meant, Rebecca began. Actually, it's exactly what you meant, I cut in. You all see me as an accessory to your lives, a convenient grandmother, a caretaker for a property you view as your inheritance, not as a person with my own desires and dreams. Daniel leaned forward, his expression pained. Mom, that's not fair. We love you. We want what's best for you. No, I said quietly. You want what's most convenient for you. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Emma, Rebecca's 9-year-old, looked from face to face with wide eyes. Does this mean we won't go to the lake house anymore? She asked in a small voice. Before anyone could answer, Thomas pushed his chair back abruptly. I need some air, he muttered, stalking out to the back patio. Rebecca turned to her daughter. We'll talk about it later, honey, she said, then fixed her gaze on me. I can't believe you would do this. Dad would be devastated. That stung, but I kept my composure. Your father would want me to be happy, Rebecca, just as he would want all of you to be happy. He never viewed Pine Haven as a prison or me as its permanent caretaker. This is crazy, Kyle said, shaking his head. You're going to regret this, Margaret. Daniel was quieter, studying me with a furrowed brow. Mom, if you're unhappy, we can figure something out, but selling Pine Haven, running off to Italy, this isn't you. That's the point, Daniel, I said gently. It hasn't been me, not for a long time, but it's who I want to be now. Jennifer, who had remained silent throughout most of the exchange, suddenly spoke up. I think it sounds wonderful, she said, smiling at me. Good for you, Margaret. Rebecca shot her sister-in-law a betrayed look. Anyone want dessert? I asked, standing up. I made apple crisp. The weeks that followed were tense. Thomas barely spoke to me, communicating mainly through terse text messages asking about practical matters related to Pine Haven. What about the boat? Sold with the house. The kayaks. Also staying. Dad's fishing gear. I'd saved it for them. Rebecca alternated between cold silence and emotional appeals. Mom, the kids are heartbroken, she told me over the phone. Emma cried herself to sleep last night talking about how she'll never swim in Lake Wayward again. I felt the weight of guilt but pushed past it. There are other lakes, Rebecca, and you can create new traditions with your children. Daniel, always the most sensitive of my children, took a different approach. He showed up at my house one evening with a bottle of wine and a concerned expression. Mom, are you okay? He asked as we sat on my back porch. I mean, really okay? This all seems so sudden. I sipped my wine thoughtfully. It feels sudden to you, I said. But for me, it's been building for a long time, since before your father died, if I'm honest. He looked startled. What do you mean? Your father and I had plans, Daniel. Once you were all settled with your own lives, we were going to travel, see the world beyond Minnesota and Wisconsin. But then he got sick and those plans evaporated. Daniel was quiet for a moment. I never knew that. We didn't talk about it much after the diagnosis, I admitted. It was too painful, but the desire to see more of the world, to have adventures, that didn't die with your father. But why not tell us? Why make these decisions in secret? I looked at my youngest son, remembering him as a sensitive boy who had always tried to make peace in family conflicts. Would it have made a difference? Would you all have encouraged me to sell Pine Haven and travel the world alone? He didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. I heard you all talking, I finally confessed, at Emma's birthday party, about how I'm confused about maintaining Pine Haven, about my eventual move to assisted living, about making sure the lake house stays in the family. Daniel's face flushed. Mom, that wasn't we didn't mean. It's okay, I said, patting his hand. It was a wake-up call. I realized that if I didn't make a change, a big one, I would just continue fatting away, becoming increasingly irrelevant except as a grandmother and a caretaker of property. You're not irrelevant, Daniel protested. Not entirely, no, I agreed. But I've been living as if my own desires don't matter, as if my only purpose is to support all of you in living your lives, and that's not enough anymore. We talked late into the evening. Daniel didn't fully understand, but he listened, and that was something. The day of closing arrived with a mix of emotions I hadn't anticipated. Deanne had handled most of the details, but I needed to sign the final papers in person. As I signed my name on the last document, transferring ownership of Pine Haven to the Morgenstern family, I felt both a sharp pang of loss and an exhilarating sense of freedom. Congratulations, Margaret, Diane said, handing me a ceremonial key with a blue ribbon, a tradition at her real estate office for sellers. You're officially starting your next chapter. I drove home with the windows down, letting the summer breeze wash over me. The proceeds from the sale had already been deposited in my account, a sum that would allow me to travel comfortably for years if I chose to. That evening, as I was packing, my flight to Rome was just 3 days away. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Jennifer standing on my porch, holding a gift bag. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said. Not at all, I replied, genuinely pleased to see her. Of all my children's partners, Jennifer had always been the one I felt most comfortable with. Come in. She followed me into the living room, where my half-packed suitcase lay open on the sofa. So you're really doing it, she said, looking at the travel guides and Italian phrase books scattered on the coffee table. I really am, I confirmed. Jennifer handed me the gift bag. A going-away present, nothing fancy, but I thought you might find it useful. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound travel journal, a set of high-quality pens, and a small digital camera. Jennifer, this is lovely, I said, touched by her thoughtfulness. I want to hear all about your adventures, she said, sitting down beside me, and not just the sanitized version you'll tell the kids. She smiled conspirationally. The real stuff. I laughed. You think I'm going to have scandalous adventures? I think you're going to have authentic ones, she replied, and those are always a little scandalous to people who are playing it safe. She glanced toward the packing explosion around us. Need any help? For the next 2 hours, Jennifer helped me sort through what to take and what to leave behind. She had traveled through Italy during a college summer abroad and offered practical advice about everything from electrical adapters to comfortable walking shoes. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. You know Thomas will come around, he's just processing. And Rebecca? Jennifer sighed. Rebecca sees everything through the lens of her children. She can't imagine making a choice that doesn't center them, but she'll adjust. And you, I asked curiously, what do you think about all this? Jennifer smiled. I think you're my new hero, Margaret Wilson, and I can't wait to hear about Rome. The Eternal City greeted me with a blast of heat and chaos. It was early July, and Rome was in the full swing of tourist season. My taxi driver from the airport seemed to view traffic laws as mere suggestions as he careened through narrow streets, gesticulating wildly as he pointed out landmarks. Colosseo, very beautiful, he shouted over his shoulder as we passed the ancient amphitheater. You visit, yes. Yes, I replied, gripping the door handle as he swerved around a Vespa. I plan to see everything. My hotel was in the Monte district, a charming neighborhood of narrow cobblestone streets lined with cafes and small shops. Hotel Adriano was modest but clean, with a small balcony overlooking a bustling piazza. First time in Roma? Asked Sophia, the young woman at the reception desk, as she handed me my key. First time anywhere, I admitted. I'm a very new traveler. She smiled warmly. Then you must let us help you discover our city, not just the tourist places, but the real Rome. That first evening, exhausted from travel but too excited to sleep, I ventured out to find dinner. Following Sophia's recommendation, I found a small trattoria tucked away on a side street. The owner, a robust man named Antonio, seated me at a small table outside and insisted on ordering for me. For your first meal in Rome, you must trust Antonio, he declared, bringing me a glass of local red wine without being asked. The pasta that arrived was the simplest I'd ever seen, cacio e pepe, just cheese and black pepper, and the most delicious thing I'd ever tasted. As I savored each bite, watching the street life unfold around me, I felt a burden lifting. The weight of obligations, expectations, and routines that had defined my existence for decades seemed to dissolve in the warm Roman evening. Later, as I sat on my tiny balcony listening to the night sounds of the city, distant music, animated conversations, the occasional scooter, I opened the journal Jennifer had given me and wrote my first entry. Tonight, I ate dinner alone in Rome, and it was perfect. I didn't cut anyone's meat, remind anyone to eat their vegetables, or worry about whether everyone was having a good time. I just experienced the moment fully and completely. Is this what freedom feels like? If so, I could get used to it. My first week in Rome passed in a blur of sensations. I walked until my feet ached, discovering hidden courtyards, ancient ruins, and peaceful gardens. I stood in awe before Michelangelo's Pieta in St. Peter's Basilica, marveling at how stone could convey such tenderness. I threw a coin in the Trevi fountain, silently wishing not for a return to Rome, but for the courage to keep exploring. On my 8th day, while having my morning cappuccino at a cafe near the Pantheon, I noticed an older gentleman at the next table sketching the ancient temple in a well-worn notebook. His lines were confident, capturing the majestic columns and dome with minimal strokes. "That's beautiful," I said when he paused to sip his espresso. He looked up, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Crazy," he replied, then switched to English with only a slight accent. "Though after 40 years of drawing it, I should hope so." We introduced ourselves. His name was Paolo Rixai, a retired architect who had designed buildings all over Europe, but returned to his native Rome in his later years. "And you," he said, studying me with kind eyes, "are a woman on an adventure." I laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "You have the look," he explained. "Alert, curious, a little overwhelmed perhaps, but in the best way." He closed his sketchbook. "Tell me, Margaret from Minnesota, what brings you to Rome alone?" Before I knew it, I was telling Paolo my story. The loss of Harold, the years of putting everyone else first, the overheard conversation, the decision to sell Pine Haven, the difficult family dinner. "Ah," he nodded when I finished. "The rebellion of the overlooked, I know it well. My own came at 65 when I left a prestigious firm because they wanted to put me in a corner office to consult while younger architects took over my projects." "What did you do?" I asked. "I bought a sailboat," he chuckled. "Navigated the Mediterranean for 3 years, nearly drowned twice, best decision I ever made." As we talked, the morning slipped away. Paolo was easy to talk to, thoughtful, funny, and refreshingly direct. When we finally parted ways, he offered to show me some of his favorite places in Rome, the spots tourists seldom find. "If you're interested," he added with a gentlemanly formality that reminded me, oddly, of Harold. "I'd like that very much," I replied. Over the next 3 weeks, Paolo became my guide to the hidden Rome. We explored ancient catacombs, visited studios of artist friends in Trastevere, and spent an entire day in the gardens of Villa Borghese, where Paolo sketched, and I attempted to capture the scenery in watercolors badly, but with great enthusiasm. Paolo introduced me to his circle of friends: Ileana, a silver-haired ceramicist; Marco and Giuseppe, a couple who ran a small vineyard outside the city; Francesca, a retired literature professor who hosted weekly dinners for this eclectic group of artists, intellectuals, and as Paolo put it, interesting wanderers. For the first time in my life, I was defined not by my relationships to others, wife, mother, grandmother, but simply as Margaret, a woman with her own stories, opinions, and emerging sense of adventure. At the end of my 4th week in Rome, I received an email from Thomas. It was the first direct communication from any of my children since I'd left the United States, though Daniel had sent a few tentative text messages asking if I'd arrived safely. Mom, I hope this finds you well in Rome. Things have been busy here, work is hectic, and the kids are in summer camp. Jennifer says I should tell you that I've been processing my feelings about Pine Haven and your decision to travel, and that my initial reaction wasn't fair to you. She's right, don't tell her I admitted that. I've been thinking a lot about what you said at that last dinner, about being seen as an accessory to our lives rather than as a person with your own dreams. I never thought of it that way, but looking back, I can see how it must have felt. Dad always said you were the strongest one in the family. I think I'm only now beginning to understand what he meant. Jennifer is bugging me to ask how Rome is, so. How is Rome? Have you seen the Colosseum yet? Eaten good gelato? Made any friends? Her questions, not mine, but now I'm curious too. Take care of yourself. Thomas. P.S. Emma wanted me to tell you that she looked up Rome on the internet and thought it looked super cool and wants you to bring her back something not boring. I read the email 3 times, tears welling in my eyes. It wasn't an apology exactly, but from Thomas, my most stubborn child, so like his father, it was significant. That evening, at Francesca's dinner party, I found myself telling Paolo about the email as we helped our hostess clear the dessert plates. It is the first crack in the ice, he said wisely. They begin to see you as a person, not just their mother. This is good, no. Yes, I agreed, though I wish it hadn't taken such drastic measures. Ah, but sometimes this is what is needed, Francesca chimed in, having overheard our conversation. The dramatic gesture, the bold action, it wakes people from their comfortable assumptions. She waved a serving spoon for emphasis. I left my husband of 30 years by announcing it at our anniversary party. Shocking, yes, but necessary. He had not truly seen me for decades. Paolo rolled his eyes good-naturedly. Francesca believes all of life should be opera. And why not, she retorted. Passion, drama, beautiful costumes. We all laughed, and as I looked around at these new friends, these people who accepted me exactly as I was, with no history or expectations, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for their company, but for my own courage in finding them. Later that night, I responded to Thomas's email with a long description of Rome, complete with photos of the Colosseum, the Spanish Steps, and for Emma, a particularly impressive gelato creation topped with fresh berries and chocolate shavings. I ended with, I've made wonderful friends here, Paolo, an architect who's showing me the Rome that tourists rarely see, Francesca, who hosts the most amazing dinner parties, Ileana, who's teaching me basic Italian phrases, though my pronunciation makes her wince. For the first time in a very